Hey everyone, this is Web Dev with Ev. This is my first pilot episode in a series where I will be talking about things like uh, web development concepts, what is current, what is old, and what web developers are going through at this time. So if you're interested in that, we'll start hopping in it right now. My name is Ev, and this is our web dev for today. We got Dawson here.
Hello.
He is a senior web dev of 5 years, so he in most trades it would be like a red seal at this point. But there is so much to know about this field, and I'd be curious on your thoughts of architecture for projects, just in general. Like you've worked on so many different projects. What are some good architectural practices, concepts, things that you like to see in a project structure?
All right. That's a very open-ended question, but let me see where I can start here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's so many different kinds of architectures, I guess, a few that I'm familiar with, and they have different purposes. I mean, I think one of the main... Okay, I'll tell you what. One of the main things you want to keep in mind, no matter what kind of architecture you're going to use, is what is the appropriate level of like complexity, like how much do you like. What you don't want to do is overbuild something, right? But you don't necessarily want to underbuild it too. And for people unfamiliar with those concepts, it's like you don't need, I don't know, an F-350 to tow a teardrop trailer, for example, right? Like you're going to be spending a lot more than you want for what you're getting, and you might have complications you need to deal with that you don't even need to be dealing with if you were to just go with a simpler solution.
Right.
On the other hand, you want to write your project in such a way where you can almost anticipate what's going to happen. The more you know about the future of your project, the more you can tailor fit an architecture to it right from the get-go. But yeah, you definitely don't want to go overbuilding things, because a lot of people have a tendency to do that, and it just ends up being way too complex and convoluted for what you're doing. So I like to think of it like this. It's almost like poetry. You want to use as little code as possible to make a functioning app, you know, as in
Right.
with poetry, you want to use as few
Yeah.
words as possible to convey a message, and this is really the same
Like limiting
concept.
to a haiku, for example, like
Yeah. Yeah.
7 sentences if you can get it down to there. Yeah.
If you can write your app like a haiku, it's probably a calculator, but it'll be a clean one.
Yeah, indeed. Very cool. I also noticed that, like, for example, just from ChatGPT, I believe it was like 3.5 to 4, they had reduced the amount of lines of code that they were using from 100,000 to 4,000, last I heard.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And that really speaks to how powerful refactoring is.
Mm.
If you're going to be a web dev getting into a new job, one of the best things you can do to make everybody like you is refactor your code before you open your PR. And for some people, this is just something they do all the time. But even if you are refactoring while you're coding, put that PR up in draft, take another look at it, go through it, and think, is there anywhere that I'm repeating myself? Is there any way that I could come up with a simpler solution? You know, you should always be thinking about refactoring your code. Yeah.
Yeah, and like we were talking before, you were saying that things like, should I even be coding this, or is there maybe like a better package library or like program that I could use instead and bring that in as well? Yeah.
Yeah, most things are made in a more complex way than they need to be. If you took a lot of time and you really wanted to find out how to make a more elegant, simpler, more iterable solution, you almost always could if you took enough time. You know, so there is that cost benefit analysis of how much time you want to spend thinking about something, and when you're at a job, you have deadlines and stuff. So that's why a lot of code ends up looking like the spaghetti that it does.
Rushed and scrambled, and sometimes
Yeah.
not thought through enough. I try to refactor, but I find sometimes I can almost spend too much time on it, like just almost beating it like a dead horse, trying to get
Yeah.
more out of it, and realizing where my own limitations are with that as well, not trying to spend too much time on it.
Yeah, there is a point when you have to make a call and say, this is refactored as much as I'm willing to refactor it right now. This is pretty good. We're going to go with it. If you're looking for perfection in the world of code, you're looking in the wrong place.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, just look at all the biggest apps in the world. They're full of bugs, right?
Right. Yeah. Is it possible to make bug-free code? I don't know. Like, I mean, I guess you'd have to have a very simple app in order to do that.
Yeah, I mean, the simpler the app, the less features it has, the easier it is to make it bug-free. I think that's definitely true. But another thing is when you're constantly iterating upon code, and this is where best practices as far as writing your code in a way that involves a certain amount of foresight. You write it knowing it's going to be iterated upon. You don't want to end up in a situation where somebody's writing a new feature a year from now and that is going to interact with what you wrote in such a way as to produce a bug. That's a big worry. And this is a reason why regression testing is so important. And I know a lot of people talk about test-driven development and nobody actually does it. Are you familiar with the concept? Yeah, so test-driven development is something I've never seen done, but everywhere I've ever worked has espoused its benefits. The fact is that most places can hardly maintain the suites they have if they're too ambitious in what they want. I mean, when you're writing tests, you should always do a cost-benefit analysis. Keep in mind how long the tests take to write, and more importantly, what it takes to maintain them as the project grows.
As the architecture changes, how is that going to affect the tests, which may need to be rewritten, refactored to accept new data, and things like that, things that would potentially crash it. As far as architecture goes, what's some of the most ambitious projects that you've worked with over the years?
I mean, as far as the largest and most complex project I've ever worked on, that would be the one I'm working on now. I can't speak too much to the specific details of it, but I can give a broad overview of the architecture.
Yeah, broad strokes sounds good.
Yeah, so they decided, so I came onto this project when it had already been going for about a year, so all the the stack and kind of all the strategies, everything was already kind of laid out by the time I got in there. So they were going with the microservice architecture, and
okay, it's very popular nowadays.
Yeah, it is popular. I often question if it was the best solution for this project, and I know that some other devs on the team, there's things that we would like to refactor. When the app was initially written, I'm not sure if they knew exactly what it would look like now, or if they were just being too over-prepared, or if somebody made a call on the client side and they wanted to go with the microservice architecture. But the advantage of a microservice architecture is that everything is compartmentalized.
Right. Okay. Yep.
So if I want to do some work on the document service, I don't have to worry about any merge conflict, anything with any other application. I mean, more importantly, when I do my deployment, I don't have to redeploy the whole app again. I can just deploy that individual service. And even more importantly than that,
right? Okay.
When the services are running, so we're using Kubernetes. So we have pods. So every service has around 2 pods as a default, right? And with the microservice architecture, if you notice that some services are having more traffic than others, you can scale those up without having to scale the other ones up.
Right. Okay.
So it makes for a more cost-efficient operation. So some services make very good candidates for microservices, like, for example, a document service, like a document generation service or something.
Right.
That should be in its own little pod. Right?
Can be very much its own niche.
Yes.
Do you find that these different microservices are interacting with each other very much, sharing information, say, whether it's through APIs?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, they have to. Yeah, so for example, when I want to generate a document, I would send an API request to the document generation service, and it's
within
going
the project architecture.
Yeah, I'm going to send it the information that it needs as far as the actual data from the database, but it is going to actually all the code for actually creating the document, and even things like templates and images, assets that need to be part of that document. Like that can all just be compartmentalized into that document generation service, and it's a very good candidate in that way. However, there is a downside to using microservice architecture.
Yes.
As it can be heavy. Every time you make
Okay.
a new .NET service, you have all the boilerplate and everything that goes along with that service. So your application is getting bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do have services that are very tightly coupled and they're sending information all the time so much, then one starts to wonder, why did we separate these? Maybe these should just be a single service.
Okay, so redesigning of the project while in production, as far as basically rearranging the services themselves, like that sounds like a lot of refactoring.
It's more than we're able to do at this point.
Yeah.
On my team specifically, but it's certainly something that some people want to do, and I'm one of those people.
Okay. Well, so there's votes for refactoring the services and combining them, basically.
Some of them, yeah. Mm-hmm. Some of them are so tightly coupled that they shouldn't have been separated. There's too many API requests going on
between the two,
and there's not much to be gained, because if you think about it, if they're so tightly coupled as that and they're almost even, it's like, we could just scale them both up.
And it's probably costing money as well in the API requests, or is that done internally and so it's not really an issue, or are they two extended services?
If you had a really large user base and you were writing something like a social media app, that would definitely catch up with you. Yeah, it would end up being a lot more. It still definitely is going to be heavier. You have to...
Right, so it's not being transferred from, like, say, one cloud to another in different parts of the world. It's all basically local in that sense, and so it's not...
Yeah, everything I'm doing is within British Columbia.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. So. Like you were saying earlier, one of the biggest customers is generally the government when it comes to web dev. I was kind of surprised to hear this, but it sounds like Canada's getting pretty tech savvy.
Yeah, so this is Canada, and in Canada, the government is very large relative to the private sector compared to somewhere like, say, America. I guess for Europeans listening, you may feel differently, but being on the other side of America, right on top of America, it is definitely very apparent that a lot more coding jobs in Canada right now especially seem to be government. I think that could have something to do with the early stages of my career being in the pandemic, and government kind of being the only game in town, a little bit.
Businesses were going down at that time.
Yeah, there are certainly lots of startups and stuff, but if you're looking for something steady, for the record, I don't work directly for the government. I work in consulting, so we just take government contracts, and a lot of contracts are government, and they do pay pretty well. So
awesome. It's good to bring in basically other consulting firms with so much experience on board to I guess start a lot of different projects. So I'm sure there's only so much we can disclose about how things are going in that area.
Yeah, I won't go into any crazy details about that.
Oh, that sounds great. As far as maybe say even the second most ambitious project you're working on, it was cool to hear about the microservices and how you microservices as they change over time might end up being a different way. With say your second biggest ambitious projects that you worked on, what were you coming across?
Well, I think, at the first company I worked at, I had a cool opportunity where I was able to use Unity.
That does sound fun.
Yeah, they were thinking of hiring a game dev to do this, and I was no game dev. I was a web dev, maybe an app dev. I'd done some work in React Native. At this point, I had less than a year on the job in the industry. I think I was at around the 8-month mark, and I just said, I want to do this. Nice. Give me a shot at it. So they gave me... Yeah, no, it was a great opportunity. They gave me a little test, and they said, if you can put this VR headset on and get this cube to move in the same way you're moving your head, on screen, I just want to see an image of a cube, and I want it to move exactly as I move my head. I want to control this cube with my head movement. If you can do that, we'll let you give it a shot. And they gave me a day to do it. I did it, and it was just a YouTube tutorial, right? And That's a great way to get your foot in the door with the new technology. Is
YouTube University?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Start with a simple tutorial, go along with it, don't just watch it, build
They
it.
got lots of good courses out nowadays. Yeah. Yeah. Very
I
cool.
mean, personally, I don't even go through courses. I mean, I know some people do. I just look up specifically what I want to do, and I only watch the bare minimum amount of YouTube I have to get my hands in and start making the
Get
thing.
it dirty. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Nice. Okay. Cool.
But this project was basically a simulation for children to teach them how to stay still inside an MRI machine
Right.
as an alternative to more traditional. I don't want to say drug-based treatments. I know that was on the table, and that's something
Yeah,
that
that
people
could
are
be
trying to move
harsh.
away from.
Yeah, very harsh on the body. Yeah.
Yeah. I think they also had like a pamphlet or something that they were trying to use. So this is a little bit more of a high-tech solution. Basically, the kid would walk through the hospital virtually, and they would get to hear the different sounds that the MRI makes. They could click little buttons virtually, and by just pointing their head and clicking something on the side of the headset
That's
to
pretty cool.
activate the sound. And then eventually they lie down, and I wrote like this script that basically just detects when they're lying down, and when it does, it puts them into the MRI mode, and so they actually see themselves sliding into the MRI, and then a game begins. Not the funnest game in the world, but a very useful game,
Okay.
which teaches them to stay still by tracking their head movement. And so basically the way it would work, and I cannot believe that I ever got them to agree to this. The concept was changed eventually. They wanted something simpler, but it was a dinosaur egg that was trying to hatch, and
Yeah.
if you move, you disturb it, and it stops hatching.
Oh, okay. Actually, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So it was like an interactive video in a sense where if you had basically stopped giving it your attention, it would basically cease and then start again from scratch?
Yeah, like it would just stop its process, and if you keep moving, then I think it will even like God, it's been like 4 years since I worked on this, and it's such a weird project compared to all the other stuff that I've
Very,
done.
very niche.
Very
Yeah.
strange, but
Love it.
they gave me too much creative license, you could say. Some kids
Oh.
love the dinosaur. Some of them got a little scared by it when it started poking its head out of the egg.
No, yeah. I'm actually afraid of dinosaurs. Anything but that. Then they move their head a lot.
I guess I loved dinosaurs so much as a kid that I was unable to
Dissociate it from anyone else's fears.
could possibly imagine being afraid of this cute little wide-eyed animated dinosaur. But
That's awesome.
yeah, the cool thing about this project is that during that little game, gyroscope data would be recorded. It would be sent to a server.
Okay.
So I think it was every minute or something, we would send a packet of data over to the server, and that would be appended to a CSV file, and these CSV files would be organized into some folder, and then we'd give it over to the research girl, and she would basically analyze the data
Wow.
and try to see how effective this thing is.
Mm-hmm.
So
It sounds like a lot of pouring through the data.
oh yeah, I'm glad I don't have to do that part.
Right.
Yeah, writing code is much more fun than going through spreadsheets.
Yeah, I can imagine.
We generate the spreadsheets. We don't read them.
Yeah, data analysis is quite a work in itself. Have you ever worked on any projects that were related to data analysts or organizing data as well?
Not so much myself, no. And I would try to steer away from that personally. It's not really my bag, but
Yeah. It's interesting. I was reading just an article. It was by like Harvard Business. They have like some kind of blog that they're going on with, and it was about how business was using AI to basically do a lot of data analysis, and like Fortune 500 companies like Vanguard and stuff were using these in order to reduce their costs. Now, through data analysis, I remember hearing this a long time ago, that even stores like Walmart were able to know when somebody was pregnant well ahead of time just by the amount of data they had on these customers, that they would even send them pamphlets on baby products before they were even pregnant. This was something that had like totally blown my mind, but I realized that data analysis has become pretty advanced
It's
in
huge.
some areas. Yeah.
yeah, it's probably the most lucrative aspect of the tech world right now, I would say. Just selling that data to advertisers. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
I have never personally worked in a project that is ripping a lot of user data and selling it.
Mm-hmm.
That's how some companies make money. Most of the stuff that I've done is working for clients, making internal applications, and I mean, everybody already works at the company. They're not looking to rip their data.
Yeah, yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And so, as far as these internal applications, do you find they are mostly employee focused or consumer based?
Definitely employee focused. Like
Mm.
a lot of the stuff that I'll do, you will have a client facing portal. So there's like a separate application that, sorry, not client facing, but how would I say? I'm trying to figure out how I explain this without going too much into the specifics of exactly what project I'm on. But essentially,
You could be talking about another project with the way you're describing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's just say that
Yeah.
you'll have the internal side and the external side sometimes. So you can
Okay.
think of it almost like more of an administrative side, and then a side that other companies that are working with this company can go and access, and they'll have limited access to information.
Okay.
But once again, we're not selling any of their data or looking to do anything of that sort. This is
Sounds like it would be a bit nefarious if you were selling other companies'
Yeah.
data. There'd be some policies involved there, I'm sure.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, it's just not the purpose of the app. It's purely a functional application
Right.
designed to serve a very specific function. Yeah.
Cool. And so with the interfacing between these different companies, I'm guessing they have their own applications and architecture. You're designing some APIs that go in between them, or using pre-existing packages. How do you find the communication works?
Yeah, every API that we use for the most part is something that is internal to the client that I'm working for.
Okay, so homegrown. Yeah.
Yeah, so we either there's some APIs that they have that we have to pull from, but mostly we've written our own for this project.
Okay.
Yeah, and we've written a lot of them. I mean, it's pretty sprawling. I think we have if you take everything all together, we're probably looking at 40, 50 separate APIs.
Wow.
At least, yeah.
Really? So
Yes.
so that sounds like quite a few APIs. Like I would imagine maybe only a couple, but is it because you're working with so many different types of business, or the amount of like different types of data that you're supplying to these businesses?
I'd say it was more of an architecture choice.
Okay.
Definitely, it could be done with fewer.
Mm-hmm.
It's somewhat a little bit overbuilt. I think it's fair to say that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not the worst thing.
Mm-hmm.
Not the best either. You know, it would be better if it was more tailor fitted. There's certainly refactors that we want to do, but we have to do the cost benefit analysis of, what would that take? How difficult is this to maintain? And realistically, of what I've seen in the industry, I can criticize this project all I like, but it is quite clean. I have seen far, far worse.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you find that many companies are happy if they're happy to refactor, or do you find that like a lot of them are really stingy in that sense, or kind of like push against refactoring it to make it easier? Because I'm assuming it's pretty expensive to actually refactor the code and change.
That's a great point you're bringing up here,
Mm-hmm.
because it can be a difficult sell to a client to try and convince them to do a refactor, even if it will save that client money in the long run.
Oh, wow.
It can be difficult.
So you even know what's best going in.
Yeah. Sorry, say again?
Well, you even know what's best for the client's financial needs going in, and they're like,
Yeah.
Sounds like they're pushing up against it.
It can just be difficult because the client often wants to see results, something tangible. Like anyone paying for something, they'd like to see something tangible for their money. So when you say there's this cost and you're not actually going to see anything, the application's going to look exactly the same. In fact, that's the point. Like that's the, you do want it to look exactly the same after a refactor. And that another good point on refactors, don't bake in new changes with your refactors. It can be tempting. You're going to find things you're going to see. I've got the hood up. I could add it right here. Don't do it. Make it
save yourself the redesigning. Yeah.
Make it compartmentalized. You want to be able to go back, and a refactor often involves some bugs being introduced. So it's best to have that PR be isolated. on
keep
a
out
single
as many
branch.
new bugs as possible, basically.
Yeah, they'll usually be a little bit of back and forth ironing out those bugs after a big refactor. Yeah,
Mm.
but
Okay.
yes, it could be a difficult sell.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds like it. Have you ever been involved in those kind of processes or more on the design team? Uh, where do you find yourself where operating most in these
Yeah.
projects?
I would be more on the technical side of it. As far as trying to sell somebody on a refactor, yeah, I'm glad I'm not doing that. That's,
Marketing is pretty big. Yeah, it's a pretty big job.
I'm not gonna, try too hard to tell somebody how to spend their money. I mean, I'll make recommendations, but if they don't want to do something that will save them money in the long run, I mean, hey, especially when you're getting paid by the hour. I mean, in theory, like, why would you fight it too much?
For sure, for sure. I was also wondering, as far as like the APIs, did you work much on the APIs themselves, or more of the architecture as far as combining different technologies, or where you found yourself on most of these projects?
Really all over the place for me because I come in as a full stack dev and I usually take on the role of kind of the everything guy, like little bit of everything guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like I kind of just romp all over the place, front end, back end, database, even DevOps deployment, even some management duties, depending on what's going on. I've had to fill in for leads before. I've led projects before within the contract that I'm currently on, a couple of them, yeah. But
do you have a certain area in particular that you like to work on the most, or even like a certain technology that you enjoy working with the most out of all that? I know it's a juicy one.
Like any dev, there are technologies that I like and there are technologies that I don't. I won't even speak about the ones that I don't. But the ones that I do, I mean, I've really come around to Angular, I gotta say.
Wow.
I know that React is probably better. I've used React. I've loved React. I would say
quite a bit, yeah.
Yeah, React is probably like the most intuitive feeling and probably the most advanced feeling. Angular is something that I had to work with for the project that I'm currently on, and coming from class-based React initially, it was similar enough that it wasn't too difficult to learn. I worked with it at the company prior as well, so I already had a little bit of experience, but at this point I would say I'm almost an Angular dev before anything else at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so using a lot of class-based components and stuff, like, does it
Yes.
feel a bit like React, like you're using your I guess you guys aren't using Redux, but something similar?
So I have used the Angular version of Redux before, NGRX. That was a case where I was leading a project, and I was not even a year into my career yet. I was so new, and my senior dev said, think ahead. And I made the classic mistake of overbuilding. There was no need for global state management, and to be honest,
right, that is a big thing. Yeah,
there's rarely a need. Like, a lot of people like to use it because
good to know
they want to feel safe no matter what direction that application goes in. We'll be able to keep up with it. It's certainly something that's easier to implement when you're starting.
It was my approach, yeah.
But you probably don't need it.
Yeah, that's good to know that in very few circumstances would you use like global state management, and then from there you would actually just be using basically micro like versions.
See, that's what often ends up happening is you use global state management, but then you don't end up using it everywhere that you would or should if you're going to follow the pattern. You end up using what's logical, and what's logical ends up being a lot simpler generally.
Okay.
So I definitely think unless you're 100% sure that you're going to need global state management, don't do it. Like,
okay.
I made it hell for the other devs on that team, forcing them to learn all this NGRX stuff that they did not have to, just because I was curious about it. I wanted to learn it. I wanted to build it up enough that it could handle where it was going to grow to. I mean, because that's a thing about development. A lot of the time, you're doing it iteratively. You have sprints. You're using some form of butchered agile. Usually, everything's changing all the time. You're going to build something, then you'll get told the client changed their mind. We're building it a different way.
Yeah.
Sometimes it will just grow a massive extension in a direction that you never even conceived of.
And it's something I'm so glad doesn't happen in construction. Like, imagine you're building a house and like, okay, you got to take that all down. You got to put these rooms all over here. Like, we just wouldn't be having any of it.
Yeah.
But a lot of that happens in web development, and
very much
sometimes to a great headache. Do you like what are some of the main issues you find when refactoring like that? Like, what are some of the most common bugs that you encounter that most people like? I mean, either they might not think of or they just do happen to come across.
Common bugs. I guess, it's hard to say because lately I've enjoyed all the refactoring I've done so much and it hasn't been that bad. But I guess what I could say is it really all depends how the application was built, right? Because if you build it in such a way where everything's very locked together and it's all kind of one big clump,
Okay.
Let's, for an example, like if your components have tons of inputs and outputs and they're so tightly bound, not just one, not just two, but they're just it's
you're just asking to mess up so many interactions when you have to refactor.
Definitely can make it more annoying. That's just one example, but in general, when the code isn't as compartmentalized, for example, if somebody was messy and they were throwing too many things into one file, it can just make it a little more annoying. When things are split apart in a logical way, this is why I love component-based architecture on the front end.
Oh, yeah, it feels so good to use components like that.
It makes it nice, and it can when you do have to iterate and when you do have to refactor, if you have well thought out component structure, like you don't want to go too micro, you don't need a component for everything, but the generally I'd say you should have one wherever seems logical. Like if there's going to be some logic and some HTML and some styling that are all encapsulated together, why not make it its own component,
Do you see any kind of like component architecture that you would prefer to see that you maybe don't always see in code?
Basically just what I said, honestly, is just making more components because you were provided with this excellent architecture, and never, even that being the case, so many people will make these massive components and it's almost like you're not taking advantage of this framework,
Yeah.
So I'm a big proponent of many components.
Nice. Okay, that's cool to hear. So you find most people are leaning more on having bloated components rather than slightly more compartmentalized, where there might be more reusability of what you already have?
Yeah, I don't know if I could speak to what most people do. I don't know if I have that much experience, but I definitely recommend not having bloated components.
Yeah.
It's a lot nicer when things are split apart in a logical way. And
this is lovely to look at.
Yeah, it makes it nice. Yeah, and this is one of those things where this is why knowledge is so valuable and why experience is so valuable and why AI is not going to replace your average web or app developer anytime soon. Just the difference in somebody who has experience and can write it in a way that's going to be easy to maintain. I don't know if most clients understand just how bad tech debt can be.
Tech debt, yes. The accrued amount of legacy code that maybe people haven't even touched in a long time that hopefully is well documented.
Documentation, that's a whole nother topic.
Maybe I shouldn't touch that, but feel free to dive in as much as you'd like.
I think that's somewhere where AI really could come in handy, is writing documentation.
Actually, that sounds perfect because it's pretty good at understanding the gist of something and then being able to transcribe it. But where you were saying like how AI is not going to replace us, I'm actually really happy with that example that you gave because I've noticed that it's trying to solve the wrong problems, is how I'd approach the conversation, is like with writing code, that's actually the easy part. Yeah. Like it's actually knowing how all these other packages work together and other like technologies and APIs, and are we doing what's best for the company's like future goal? How are we reducing tech debt? Like it would have to understand a lot of broad concepts in order to distill them into something that we would actually think is good code as web developers.
And the larger and more complex a project becomes, the more that human knowledge becomes so valuable and the more useless AI becomes at you have this massive pre-existing system and you're trying to do something within it that follows the correct patterns, that doesn't cause any issues, that just fits in. And yeah, I find
Well, that's the very good news for all the young web devs who want to get into it as well.
And as an example, at my company, we did look into GitHub Copilot at one point. Some of us experimented with it a little bit. I did myself as well.
Okay.
And I found it to be pretty useless for me. I mean, personally. Maybe it's because I've been on the project for a long time and I already know pretty much what I want to do, and like it's not going to save me a whole lot of time. It's almost more annoying to figure out how to give it the correct prompt to get what I want. But
Right.
yeah, if you were doing some very repetitive coding and you had to do similar tasks again and again, like this is what AI is good at, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
But if you're writing the same repetitive code again and again, then I think the bigger question is, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Why aren't you writing better code? Because this is one of the things that was kind of like a light bulb, like a aha moment for me. It was realizing that we're writing code so that we don't have to write code. We're writing code so that the end user doesn't need to know what code is. That they don't need to write a code, that they can just use a graphical user interface, or even when we make our own debugging tools. Like I've worked with 3JS a bit, and realizing that it is actually really helpful to make your own user interface where you can debug things on the fly and see different outcomes. Like, for example, you might not understand what something is going to look like or be represented as visually just by changing a couple parameters on your y-axis, your z-axis, and repositioning things, or even using a slightly different like texture till you see it in the lighting and you go, oh, that's what it looks like. So now I need these sliders, now I need these like toggles and switches to really narrow down what I want to see.
That's cool.
And yeah, it is fun to work with. It's been a nice thing to just check out on the side. I think his name is, actually I want to get his name right when I say it, but I wanted to say Simon Bruno. Is that like?
I'm not familiar.
I'll have to double check before I run with it. But he's got this course called 3JS Journey. It's was recommended by a friend and has been an absolute blast to explore with. So yeah, just random plug in there. So yeah, 3JS course is pretty good, called 3JS Journey. But yeah, the main point being that we're writing code so eventually we won't have to have code as the main arbiter, which is really funny to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think, part of the thing is that we're already working with such high-level languages. Like, in a way, so much is already being written under it. Like, modern high-level languages, like, JavaScript or C#,
greater levels
things
of
that I work
abstraction.
with.
Yeah.
And TypeScript is better. I've conceded that for large projects.
Yeah.
Without going down that rabbit hole right now, we are at such a high level already. The code that we're writing, it's almost like the most accurate AI prompt you could give, in a way.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I think of it,
It's very close to English in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And when you're writing modern web apps, even when you're not using low-code tools like, WordPress or whatever, you still don't need to write that much code if you're doing it the right way. And when people end up writing a lot of code, I would say that can often be the wrong direction, because the way that these frameworks are set up, there's so much being done for you. If you really understand the framework, you read the docs, and you follow the patterns that the framework wants you to follow, you're going to have a smooth time for the most part, Don't fight the framework. Don't fight it.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, and especially for these frameworks that have been out a long time, there's a lot of code documentation on how to use them. With things like, I've been using Next.js and Next.js 14 and Next.js App Router, there's not even the best amount of documentation out there right now, which is kind of funny. If you want to look it up or like videos and stuff like that, or even in the forums, a lot of it is using the old Next.js because it's been ramping up so quickly and making huge changes from one to the next. Like, so they got rid of the source directory to move to the app router, and these changes, like when I was writing the APIs, I had to change how I wrote the APIs like quite a bit.
Oh, and that's just the big problem with this industry, and its greatest benefit in many ways, but it moves so quickly.
Yeah,
so much, like the technology moves so much faster than the market does, than the actual jobs do, right?
Yeah,
like that's something to keep in mind, because I know when everybody gets into web dev and app dev, they want to do the latest and the greatest.
Yeah,
who
they do.
wouldn't, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's where I'd even
the
say
cutting edge. Yeah,
like that's where boot camps can be really nice compared to traditional education, just because at least Lighthouse, they were always updating their curriculum every year. You were really getting what's current, and it's not some giant 4-year thing that by the time you graduate, the entire landscape has changed. Like that wasn't the case with me. But even so, you get into the job and then you realize, oh my God, this is a bunch of old shit most of the time.
This was written 4 or 5 years ago.
You're going to be maintaining legacy products. I mean, a lot of the money makers are going to be older products. Like, I mean, at my first job, the biggest money maker we had was a WordPress app. A WordPress app.
Yeah.
Out of all the cool things we were doing with, even Laravel, which isn't that new or that cool. It's still PHP, but I like it better than WordPress. Or, Twill or, Vue or React or whatever. We did projects in those. But the WordPress one, that's where the money was.
Wow. Yeah. And I find that so interesting because what about like I don't want to jump the gun on it, but the vast majority of websites being made out of WordPress.
Yeah.
Like, giving numbers, I was definitely hearing more than half, but I don't know how far that actually went past that.
Yeah, I was hearing the same. I don't know the exact number, but I've heard numbers like a lot of people will say like 90% of the internet is PHP or something, and most of that is WordPress. I think I've heard that said. There's certainly a lot of, you can write websites in PHP without even using a framework, but just as a tangent, if anybody is going to work in PHP and wants to write an API, I love Laravel.
Okay.
It's so well documented.
Yeah, it's just a pleasure to use.
It's a pleasure to use, yeah.
Nice.
Even if you don't like PHP, Laravel is really one of the best back-end frameworks out there.
Okay, wow. That's awesome, because I find that great documentation makes for a great user experience.
It does.
Yeah.
It does, yeah. Great documentation is so important. You can get by without it if you really want to use something cutting edge and cool. It's probably not going to be worth it. But do it if you want to,
Okay, so we were talking about Lighthouse Labs a little bit earlier, and for our final project, we had decided to use all of the most recent technology that we could find. And so we were like, okay, there's ChatGPT API, there's like Next.js, we're going to use all the most recent stuff. We're using like Stripe and Clerk and stuff like that, and bring it all together. And what was really crazy was we were even, like, there wasn't even docs for what we were doing. I can't believe how ambitious this was, because we hadn't even learned this framework in our course. We just knew React and Ruby and on Rails and other things like that. And so when we went to go make this like API request to the ChatGPT API, we were using experimental functions. We were not even looking at the docs. We were looking at forums. We were looking at what these crazy guys had gone to like try and experiment with, and we're like, okay, we're gonna try some of that and see how that works. And we were actually able to get function calling out of ChatGPT using the logic to decide which functions it was going to call in the code to produce different results, whether it was updating health, whether it was presenting an image, or whether it was generating more story text. So that's how we like built out our role-playing app. But yeah, what was so crazy about that was the lack of documentation. We spent a lot of time just trying to figure out and testing, debugging, like how to even just get it to work.
Brings me back.
Yeah.
You know, this is one of the reasons I love Lighthouse Labs so much, is for those final projects. You can really be as ambitious as you want, so long as your other group members are down. And
I'm glad to say they were down.
yeah, if you don't have a burning passion for code, don't go the boot camp route. I don't think, because it's so enjoyable if you do have that passion, and you're really gonna have a lot of fun with it, and you're gonna need that fire, because these things move fast, and you're gonna be thrown into the job market, and you won't have that degree. You know, you're gonna have less than that, but it really doesn't matter once you get your first job. All you have to do is get that first job, even if it's only 6 months. If it's a year, great, you know. But once you get your foot in that door, and you have some good references, forget about a 4-year degree. Don't need it anymore. For context, I never set foot in post-secondary, not one step ever. I was a waiter, and then I took the Lighthouse Labs boot camp for 3 months, and I was able to get a job on graduation day. And yeah, within a year of my restaurant burning down, I had already completed my 6 months internship at my first job.
Nice. Wow. So waiter on his journey into senior web dev, no post-secondary.
No post-secondary.
And a lot of happy clients as a result.
Yeah, and a lot of, and even more important than happy clients sometimes is happy teammates, and happy managers and happy bosses. And,
so you have a good team that you like to work with.
I love my team. I'm not ashamed to say it.
I'm so happy to hear that. Like, what is a better joy than working with a good team?
Yes, and that goes for any industry. And that, you know, when I got into Lighthouse Labs, they mentioned about how you may think the career you had before isn't relevant to coding, but focus on the parts where it is and try to play to your strengths and play to your experiences. For example, a waiter, a cook, these are people that work on a team. I mean, when you're in a restaurant, it's a fast-paced environment. You know, indeed. You're working hand in hand with garnishers, bartenders, cooks, clients, customers. You know, it's not so different in a lot of ways. There are some similarities, and so I love working on a team. And the better the cohesion, you know, the better you all can get along, and the more efficiently you can work together, you're gonna have a good time. So just, you know, put your best foot forward and make anything you can do to make your teammates' life easier. They're going to like you more. It's going to be better for everything, you know, and when you have a team that works together well, then the manager's happy. And, you know, the product is going to be better at the end of the day. So there's a huge interpersonal aspect of web development that isn't really that focused on, but you do get that in the boot camp. That's one of the great parts about it.
I'm glad to see that, and I'm glad to hear it. Like, there's this huge stereotype of the coder or web developer being this person who's living under a rock, doesn't see any sunlight. Some of it's true.
I mean, you don't want to see too much sunlight. The eyes get totally a little sensitive.
Yeah. They burn a bit. That said, I actually think this is a great time to segue into the knowledge, whether it being the team or the individual being basically the product as far as what comes out at the end of the day, and your thoughts on that. I know it's pretty extensive how knowledge affects what we write into our code and how we write it, what we write it for.
Yeah, this could be a big topic, and I'll have to take a moment to think about where to get my foot in with this one. But yes, you know, at the end of the day, you know, even more, like, knowledge is so important. Knowing how everything fits together, knowing all the different technologies that come together to form an application, a functioning application, and not just the technologies, but the processes that are used to build, to maintain, and, you know, beyond even tech, the interpersonal dynamics and the right kind of arrangements. Like, I mean, Agile, everybody says they're doing Agile, probably few are actually doing it
because it's so resource heavy.
I don't even know if I know what it is anymore, you know. Like, it's just
do they
people just throw out these buzzwords and try to develop that way. But at the end of the day, what really matters is being able to pick up new technologies and be put in unprecedented situations and adapt. Because, I mean, think about like a human compared to an AI. You know, an AI can only do what it's done, fundamentally. It can only do what has been done before. And what you're going to get paid for and what's going to make you valuable as a developer in the industry is being able to be confronted with a novel situation or at least a novel version of a situation, something that's
Mm-hmm.
been done before, but you're doing it slightly differently now, and to
Mm-hmm.
be able to translate that into code efficiently, and even figure out how to, what kind of solution do you want to this problem. I mean, I guess even deeper than that, yeah, ultimately what we're doing as developers isn't just writing code. We're finding
Mm-hmm.
solutions to problems,
Mm-hmm.
where that problem is, I need customers, I need people to be able to see, like, basic example, I'm a restaurant. I need people to be able to know what my restaurant's about, and
Mm-hmm.
I need them to be able to see the menu. As a developer, you design them a solution, and just being able to creatively think up the best solution to that problem, that is what you're going to get paid for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And potentially even like future problems that the AI wouldn't think about either.
yeah,
That you may either come from experience or hearsay or like, yeah, some things like that as
and
well.
being able to factor into what you're writing the anticipation of what might come later. You know,
Mm.
I mean, there's just it's such a massive topic, man. It's a huge topic.
I
Yeah, we
love
definitely
it.
won't be able to.
I love it. Yeah, if we can't fit it all in then tonight, that's fine
Oh,
too.
we'll never fit it all in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's something that everybody needs to know when you're getting into the industry is that you're
Mhm.
never gonna know it all. You're never
Yeah.
gonna know it all. It's even if you could, tomorrow you won't. That it's moving so fast, you'd never be able to catch up. What a good thing to focus on is just being flexible. Getting used to going from language to language.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to say that when you're new you shouldn't focus on one language primarily. You probably should. It'll be better to just to build your skills and to you don't want to be too all over the place. You do want to be focused, but flexible as well. Being able,
Flexibility, yeah.
yeah, if you are offered an opportunity to work in a totally new technology, something you've never done before, and you're not even sure if you can do it, if you can get that opportunity, take it and focus on it and just go as far as you can with it. And yeah, any opportunity you can get to experience a new technology when you're starting out is good. You just don't want to do a new one every week.
Mm-mm. Yeah, that would spread you pretty thin pretty fast, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
As far as like where you're at now, what are some things that you would prioritize learning or want to learn more about at this stage in the game?
At this stage in the game.
Yeah.
Okay, at this stage in the game for me, I already kind of know what I like and what I don't as far as technologies go. So,
Mm-hmm.
but then again, things are changing all the time. So, for example, I was looking into making a new application, and I'd never used Next before.
Okay.
And I thought, okay, everybody's talking about this Next thing. Let's see
Mhm.
what's up with it. And I do think that if you're making a like a website, that seems to me to be the no-brainer. Like if I'm going to make a website, I'm going to make it a Next. However, if you're making a website that also has a native app, which is what I'm doing,
Okay.
I would recommend not going with Next, because the more I looked into it, the more I realized the big sell point of Next is that you have the option server-side rendering.
Yeah. Server-side
Server-side rendering. And how did that ever become cool? That's the way the old internet was. We thought it was lame and old,
right.
but it has advantages for SEO, it has advantages for speed. It's nice to not have to re-render everything all the time. If some parts of the page are always going to be static.
Yeah.
And I haven't even really looked into it that much. I haven't even worked with it, but it does look great, and I would love to do something with it at some point.
Mm-hmm.
For now, though, I went and said, okay, if I'm going to have a native app and I'm going to have a website, then I don't want to have to, have this server-side rendered component and then have a separate route for giving the JSON to the native app.
Right.
I want to make one API that everything can use,
Mm-hmm.
So... And this is an example of having a problem and finding the appropriate solution, just to tie back into what we were talking about.
And for example, like an AI would just be like, okay, I'm gonna just try to make it work in Next because that's what you suggested. But when a human being's knowledge and experience says, well, I'm gonna need an API to basically handle both of these interfaces, it wouldn't be the correct solution. And AI doesn't really seem to understand these problems.
AI doesn't understand anything.
Yeah.
It's just a data aggregation and presentation tool. That's a good thing to keep in mind about it. And I mean, one of the probably the most senior developer that I've had the opportunity to work with was just talking the other day in a dev scrum about how there's this new AI that he's working with that has the ability to check itself. Like, it gives you a solution, but before it actually presents the solution to you, it goes and it looks at it, and it's a very rudimentary form of thinking, you could say. Certainly not understanding, but yeah, that's another humongous topic. But suffice to say, being a human, finding a creative and appropriate solution to the problem you're dealing with in a relatively unique situation, that is where your value is going to be in designing that. Yeah, and in implementing it in a way that makes sense. There's just so much to consider, like, as far as, is your code testable? Is it, how is it going to look, 10 years from now? How are your tests going to look 10 years from now,
Yeah.
Like, sometimes you encounter a situation in the test where you got a hard-coded date, and then you have certain parameters for that date, you come back in a year, and of course it would have always failed in a year. And, these are things to keep in mind. There's so much to think about. You're always going to make mistakes. This is why we have PR reviews, but
yeah.
so always learning, as a dev, you're always learning. That's the big thing. New technologies, new strategies. Yeah.
Are there any concepts you learned that you thought were maybe less talked about but really useful? That maybe
it's
not
funny.
everyone knows?
It's funny because people are always talking more than they're doing when it comes to cool concepts, right? Like TDD, test driven development, is a perfect example. Everyone's always going, you know what the best way to code is? TDD. And it's like, tell me how many projects you've religiously done TDD on.
Yeah.
Like,
no, I mean, honestly, I cringe a little bit when I hear it, because I know that's just not the case, because everyone wants the application out as soon as possible.
Yeah.
They don't want to pay, twice as much to have you code twice as much as you'd normally be doing to check every feature. But
and it involves a kind of a strange way of thinking sometimes. It almost seems a little bit backwards, to me at least. But what I like to do, and this may be helpful to some people listening, it's not TDD, but it's like when you're writing your service methods on the back end, when you're writing the business logic, the real meat and potatoes of it, you obviously want to have unit tests for that, regardless of the other integration or even end-to-end tests that you're doing. You do want to unit test your service methods with the business logic in them. And a good way to go is to write it, keep in mind how you're going to test it as you're writing it. You don't actually have to write those tests. Just keep it in your mind. I want this to be testable in a way that's going to make my writing of the test easy, And then when you're done the feature and you have the feature working, write your tests, and as you're writing those tests, you're going to see opportunities for refactor, and that's where I would do my refactoring. As I'm writing those tests, it's usually going to become apparent. And like, so in a way, by the time I have the basic feature completed, it's like there's still little bits and bobs left out, and as I'm writing the tests, I'll fill in those bits and bobs. I'll see kind of like where any remaining holes are. It helps me. So it is kind of TDD in a way at the end, just not straight from the beginning.
Right.
That's the way I like to do it now, and I find it produces quality code, passing tests, and you don't have to start off with the test, which to me is so boring, and like I want to write the feature.
That was some great insight into your process. Yeah, that's really cool. And also, as far as like the areas of development that you enjoy the most, it sounds like you get pretty excited when you talk about backend, like database. Is there a certain particular area that you find you enjoy the most to work with?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a hard one to answer for me, because I'm not one of those full stack devs that had to be strong armed into one side of it. I said, I'm more like this, but I less like that. And it was so difficult for me early in my career, because they tried to push me. They're like, okay, a lot of us start off as full stacks, but what are you going to specialize in? And I insisted. I'm like, I won't. Like, I have to, because I love the back end, I love the front end.
I love both.
I want to be, and I like to start from the database. Anytime I'm doing anything, I'll always, like making a new app or even a new feature, I always start from the database, then back end, then front end. That to me seems to be the logical progression. One kind of builds off of the other, like a pyramid. But yeah, God, what I will say is that I definitely prefer writing code to like setting up release pipelines and build pipelines and doing all that DevOps stuff. I do a lot of that in my job. I've done a lot of it for solo projects as well. It's definitely less enjoyable, because you're not. I mean, okay, nowadays there are some new ways of doing it. I say new. This kind of reflects how antiquated some of the processes we use are. But rather than going in through some GUI and clicking drop downs and stuff, I would like to have my DevOps stored in a different way, like as much of it as can be YAML or JSON or whatever. Like,
Okay.
I think it would probably be YAML if you were doing it that way. Yeah, you could have the pipelines and stuff actually defined in there. That way you have source control, and I would like to treat my DevOps more as code. But the way that a lot of people do it, the way that it's traditionally been done, the way that I've done it in the projects I've worked on, it is still some clicking around. Like think Azure Classic Editor for anybody who knows it. I'm sorry if you,
so
you do.
Yeah, bringing up some memories for some people and others. Yeah, as far as like the deployment and stuff, I don't know if you've got to play with Vercel lately, but
Is that what they use for Next?
Yes.
Yeah,
so
okay.
Vercel and Next are like this.
Yeah,
They're buddy, like nobody's business. But they have basically streamlined it into being able to upload from your GitHub onto Vercel and then just like one-click deploy. And when it compiles, it'll be like, okay, do you have any compilation issues for Vercel? And if so, you might want to check on those. Most likely, like there'll be some things that'll catch you on that like are just unexited, like apostrophes or something like that. But one of the things that I found was a issue with Vercel was like timeout limits. So if you are finding that you're using more time to make an API request for Vercel than you had anticipated, Vercel is going to clock you out at about like 15 seconds, I believe. So we had to increase that volume to like 60 seconds or say like even more if you're making a call for like a significant amount of data or process.
Yeah. It's definitely not ideal to have an API call take that long, which is why those limits are there. But depending on what you're doing, what the requirements are, that could be a situation that you face. Although I think a good solution to that could also be sometimes doing things in parts, maybe using a process with polling. So like you would send a request to the API. The API would initiate a process, and then your front end on an interval could pull that API, and then eventually it will say process completed, and then at that point that API request can get it back, or you could say, oh, process is completed, oh, now I'm going to go get that data that's ready for me.
Okay, yeah.
But no, I haven't worked with well, I guess I did deploy an app via Heroku when I was going to Lighthouse.
Heroku, yeah.
Which is kind of like the OG one-click deploy.
Yeah, I know. It's funny. I use Heroku as well for the database, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that most projects, most working developers on like, yearly contracts are going to be working on, you're going to be using more mainstream tools like AWS or Azure. Yeah, it's probably going to be more like that, I think. That's been my experience in any case.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because, I mean, I don't actually know how recent AWS is.
Oh, it's ancient.
It's ancient. Okay,
I think it predates the Amazon store even.
What? Wait. Yeah. AWS predates the actual Amazon that everyone knows?
I could be talking out of my ass here, but I'm pretty sure they do. I thought they started in the server, in the hosting game, yeah.
That would have caught me totally by surprise because like everyone knows Amazon through their products and being able to order something online. Yeah. But if they actually started more in the server side of things with like cloud computing and stuff like that, whoa.
I'd say it's the most fleshed out. Like they certainly have the most of the market share. I think AWS. Like I think they definitely most servers. Even if you're going somewhere else, like I could be mistaken, but I think even if you're hosting somewhere else, it could still actually be that company is
hosting from AWS.
From AWS, yeah.
Wow.
I think AWS is a great one to learn if especially if you're planning to freelance or something. And most clients will be happy and with AWS. It's kind of like an industry standard.
Okay, cool. That's good to know. I was looking into like multi-cloud applications. Like you have to grow quite a bit to be like multi-cloud because you're looking to service like different parts of the world, and when you're doing so, they will have different, like you want to keep your data as close to the service provider as possible.
Yeah.
And so that's why you'll have multi-cloud platforms. And when you do that, you'll find that different clouds handle your data differently. And that's the issue, is creating your application to be able to interface with a whole bunch of different cloud providers. Is you have to basically start with your application that can be, it's very abstracted. It has different abstraction layers that will allow it to be more easily understood by each cloud platform that it reaches. So it'll have like its APIs, and then it'll have different layers that handle the other clouds as it makes its way to it, which is just like, wow, you're basically writing the app 3 different times as far as integration. But you're staying with a core that can be interpreted by 3 different layers.
Interesting.
That can get it to the cloud. Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that situation yet. Probably could be because most of the stuff I've done has been local to British Columbia.
Right. Yeah. Mostly working with a local provider. Yeah.
Yeah. So I haven't done a worldwide launch of a web app yet.
You gotta be pretty successful. Like we're talking Fortune 500 for most people.
Well, I think it comes down to the fact that ever since I got into this industry, save for a brief 3-month period where I did a bit of contract work and took time off work, I've just been on a yearly contract doing whatever I'm doing for the client. And I do recommend it to anybody out there working on side projects, but I'm sure anybody who works full-time in the industry knows that after a day of work, it can sometimes be difficult to go right back into the IDE and start coding something else.
Yeah, it's I noticed there's something about like the amount of capacity you have when you're thinking about one project, and then you just kind of have to swap all of that out to put on basically a different helmet to get into a different way of thinking about how you're handling your data, and all that can be exciting, but it's definitely quite a swap.
Yeah, no, it is exciting, and if you're really in a motivated frame and you have all that energy, you're going to sacrifice probably your social life in its entirety if you're going to be working full-time and working on a project in a very diligent way. But it can be an absolute blast. There's nothing more fun than just being like totally absorbed in a project to the point where you go to bed with questions and you wake up with answers, and you're just diving straight into it.
And I'm guessing you had this a couple times as well. I've gone to sleep with questions, and I actually woke up thinking the answer as I opened my eyes. Now, whether that's because I was dreaming about it or because those were the first couple thoughts I had in my head, I don't know, but that was a moment for me, like, that just brought me a lot of joy.
Yeah, it's cool.
I didn't know the brain could do that.
No, definitely. I mean, that's why they say, sleep on it, right? Like, that's an old expression, and it's true. When you go, I feel like a lot of the time when you're asleep, there's unconscious processes running that like organize and digest the data that you've absorbed during the day. So I think maybe when you wake up, it's like, it's a difference between having a database of files with no categories and waking up and everything's categorized and indexed, and now all of a sudden I can get the information I need to have the solution that I want. It just comes to me, it's just readily available. The query is executing a lot faster.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet. And sometimes you come to the game with a clear head too. Once you get that sleep. I also find it interesting because you and I are both into not just taking care of our minds but our bodies as well.
Yep.
Like working in the physical workouts, I found them to really help with my coding as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Giving a clear head, and
that's something that's so important when you're going into this industry. It's so easy to just become a brain in a jar, but you have a body. And if you neglect it, that brain in a jar is going to not work as well. And
the jar won't look so good either.
No, it won't. Yeah. And there's nothing bad about doing workouts and exercising and running. A lot of people like to hate on running. You don't need to run a marathon every day. You don't even need to run every day. But a few times a week, running and working out, I'd say is pretty much the bare minimum if you're going to be doing a non-physical job where you sit down all day, because and also having the right chair is a huge thing. I could go on. If you've watched any kind of podcast before, you might recognize this chair. Everybody uses this chair, and for a good reason. Having that adjustable lumbar support and having your sacrum supported, actually, like the lower part of your spine. I have definitely had the wrong chair before.
Oh my goodness.
There's nothing worse, So take care of your body when you're getting into development. Do not neglect the body.
Yeah, that's actually why I got into web development in the first place. I was not caring for my body. Wasn't taking care of it. I broke my back I was actually still pretty fresh when we had first met. And at this point, like it's basically healed up now, but I did find that the proper chair actually does matter.
Oh, yes.
I definitely wouldn't be using like a piano chair if I could bench, but that said, the support is great for allowing you to continue uninterrupted or with fatigue later on down the road.
Yeah, you don't want your body distracting you when you're in the zone.
Thank goodness.
You don't want to have to be, oh, that hurts there, this feels weird here. No, the best kind of coding is when you're comfortable enough and you're in shape enough that you don't have like any terrible pain going on, and obviously, I could have better posture, as I'm sure you guys can see, and us computery people, especially, if you're
notorious for it. I try to keep a good backstory. My dad taught me that way.
You definitely have better posture than I do at this point.
Thank you.
I was a gamer before too, so
it's funny because I haven't been able to tell. I always thought you did have good posture, or
it could get a lot worse.
Okay,
it definitely gets a lot worse. I try to be mindful of it, but I know that I definitely have a lot farther to go. Like when I get straight into the zone, sometimes coding, gradually that turtleneck comes out of its shell and goes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I hear you. I actually think I'm a culprit of that as well. I just pay less attention.
It's a natural, that's gonna happen when you're getting into the zone. The important thing is that when you're done your shift, at least a few times a week, you go out for a run, you stretch it out, you do a hang, you do. I'm a big proponent of calisthenics. Yeah. I'm not looking to compete in any weightlifting competitions here, as you can probably tell by the look of my arms, but I do want to feel good and I want to be healthy,
Yeah. Oh, I'm not sure if you're in the view, if we're leaning back too much, but that's for anyone who's watching.
I could have gone out of the view there.
Yeah, it's all cool. But that also said, speaking of which, like getting proper sleep and all that.
Oh God.
Maybe we should just wrap it up for tonight, because it's probably need to get a good.
I thought we were gonna start talking about blue light blocking glasses and how if you're gonna code late at night, a pair of these isn't the worst thing.
Speaking of which, you mind if I just throw this
go
on?
ahead.
We got red and blue.
Yeah.
Red pill, and blue pill. Cheers.
I never thought of myself as a blue pill guy.
No. Well, right on. I hope you guys had a lovely listening session. This was actually really fun to do with
It was,
friend Dawson, and I'm looking forward to more of these as well. So if you're interested, this is going to be an ongoing series, and looking forward to bringing some good content to you guys.
And perhaps next time you might even meet some other people in the industry that I work with, some good mutual friends of ours, and
that'd be lovely. Okay, well, thank you so much, and I wish to everyone a good night.
Thank you all.
Awesome. Okay, that was so fun. I actually had a blast, dude. You hold